All right, so I guess we'll start with the flow really quick. So just in basic terms, I guess we went the basics of HTML, the environment setup, through to the basics of CSS and how to include pages. And then within that section, we would really talk about dev tools and why we use them and how we use them. And then, getting into the quotes, the quotes and the fleers, floating and clearing. And then we would go to the box model, adding in resets, and then media queries. There were 2 days in the lesson plan for media queries, and we're thinking maybe we can cut one of those out like we did in my section, and just had it really focused in on the one. And then we moved on to Bootstrap, like what is a framework? Why would we use a framework? Isn't that like cheating? So
it's a good cheating.
It's the best cheating. So and then we would go into kind of the more in-depth Bootstrap, so like offsetting, visible excess, hidden excess, that kind of stuff. And then move into like the plugins, so Animate CSS, forms. We can probably bust into forms because there are 2 days that I think we can combine into one for the Bootstrap. There was the nav bar, which was one whole class, and then those responsive things. So I think we can combine those into one and then give them more things to put into their final project. I think by the time their final project rolls around, they can do a lot more than just have a basic splash page with Bootstrap. I think we can have them add in a form. We can have them add in maybe some, we could have them know about DNS and hosting and all that before or after. It might make sense to do it after. That way, once they have their final project, we can teach them how to host it and how to buy a domain, and then have them leave class with a profile or a portfolio site already built out and bought. I think that would be a cool end of the class thing too.
I like that.
Let's do that.
Do you have the questions? And
I had some struggles when I was first learning how to do sites, and one of the main ones I saw in the beginning was the path. When you're actually including the CSS and like the slashes and the C, they might not even know how to get that, especially like if they're on a Mac or Windows. Like Windows, we could show them like you can copy the path from the Explorer, but in Mac, how can they find the path?
It's right in Terminal. Terminal's a little advanced, perhaps maybe.
I don't think most HTML people are not using
but it's good.
Yeah.
I think it's good to introduce. It's good to introduce that concept of what a path means in a more general sense, and the evolution of that. It really ultimately goes back to the Unix terminal.
Are you talking about just like clicking and dragging it into the terminal and seeing that it has a path?
Yeah.
So attached to it.
Some way that doesn't force them to become some sort of Unix expert, but at the same time forces them to confront that notion.
Yeah, it's like a cheater method. You may be able to even drag it into like a text editor or something. We don't have to like bring up a terminal to scare them. But if it's relative, we need to teach them that it's like inside a folder, outside a folder, right? We have like current folder dot. We want to go up one, it's dot. We want to go in, it's slash.
Right. We want to explain that too, like the dot, like actually in their code how they would get like their CSS, how they get anything they need from that.
So that's not in the lessons, I don't believe. So when would that be covered?
We have it covered in 7 because 7 they do an image opacity for a background of a div. So in that div, they'll have to go in their CSS and apply a background image to that, and that'll be in their image folder. So they'll have to jump out of the CSS folder, jump into the image folder, and that way they'll kind of
link them together. Yeah, an image inside a CSS file if they're in separate folders.
Yeah. So hopefully that will help. But sometimes students would end up just like copying it from wherever they found it,
moving it into CSS. Yeah.
Another problem we thought of was CDN versus local, like for Bootstrap and anything else they would need, like what's the difference and where they can put it into their code. And also the meaning of cascading, like what exactly is that? Like explain exactly what's going on with that. And also just the template that we have for the workbooks, like the head, body, whatever, explain that flow and try to compare it to something tangible in the real world, like a newspaper or something. Like, okay, in this newspaper, compared to this website, this would be the div, this would be the body, whatever. Try to give them a visual that they can understand. So that's And there's a lot of things like hex code, what the hell is that? Like framework, what is that? We also want to kind of show them, like in the beginning, how to view the source of an existing website, so they can see and break down exactly how this is used in everyday websites. Like pull up a favorite site, click the view source, and try to manipulate.
Nice.
That's some stuff we found.
Cool. Awesome.
Sort of to add to some of the points that they had, as we were going through the curriculum, and me being ADD and distracted, everything they were talking about was like fantastic. And I kept thinking like, oh, this would be a really cool thing to like tease them with. Like, here's like a visual toy that you could potentially play with. Like, if we were going to talk about the path, be like, hey, like this is related to the command line. If you want to learn more about this, here's this. Rather than necessarily like saying like it's required, but just sort of saying like, here's something you can go do. And so I sent out in the Slack channel like a bunch of different resources, or something that explains the box model really well, that allows you to like interactively move it around and do stuff, or like how to determine what the specificity tool is through like another tool that someone else built. And I just think those are, like, me personally, I was like, some of that stuff gets super confusing unless you have a toy or something that you can mess with. And so
That's cool.
Yeah, that's actually really great. And then in the lessons, it'd be nice, like the first time you say box model, or we try to do it, put a link in there. You know, make the box model word clickable, to where if they link, it'll bring them to this other page.
Oh, yeah, like the one that your friend made for the.
yeah, I was just thinking like extra credit or something that they get like a strong like experience of what that is beyond maybe the text that they have, or like the experience that they do coding, so they can come back and like visualize exactly what's going on.
Yeah, visual tools are the best, and we should have resources. At the end of the lesson, there could be like a resource section, linking, or even like a whole repository that's like a glossary of terms, which is like box model, and here's like the Wikipedia definition, but then also here are these like really cool tools that people make to help you visualize.
That'll
So
teach you
maybe,
to use that.
so maybe like a glossary GitHub repo maybe well too.
That'd be cool.
The other ones that I thought were interesting was like talking about when you first get into CSS, like coming from the HTML to semantic HTML, and then you go into CSS, like you show them CSS Zen Garden, which is the same HTML again and again and again, just like styled in a whole bunch of different ways, and that can really like show the value of like how important CSS is. Or once we get into Bootstrap, you know, initially it's like really foreign concept, but then all of a sudden you can say like, here's like an example of 200 pages that are all built using Bootstrap. They all look totally different.
Yeah.
I think that's cool. I think that as we implement this curriculum, we'll be able to make it fatter and add more to it, and that these kind of resources are huge and are going to make it better. So please find them, and don't just put them on Slack, but add them to the actual repository, add them to the lesson.
It would also be kind of cool if every time we talked about Bootstrap or something, like we referred to a student project. So we're like, hey, like this is a student, like, oh, check out, you know, Eddie's thing that he built, or all the things that Eddie's built.
Let's just look at Eddie's projects. Let's do a case study of Eddie. That'll be the class.
Look at how successful
This
Eddie
is
is.
Eddie.
He's charming. He's good.
You can be like Eddie. Eddie's smart.
I'm really selling it. I had one question that I legitimately didn't know the answer to, so if any of y'all know, I didn't do the steps where I Googled it too extensively, but when we were talking about the CSS and why we include pages separately, like a CSS reset, we have a whole separate document for that. Some of the students would come at me like, why don't we just have one CSS page with all of my CSS on it? Why would I need, 3 different pages with all this stuff? And I was like, it's good practice. That's what I ended up going with, because that's how I was taught, and that's, for organization, it makes me think like the order of things they're going in. But I didn't know if there's a better answer for that. So if any of y'all know.
Same reason we said